No problem. Okay, well, I guess the first thing to do is to explain a bit about what Fit to Ride is and the type of things that we do. Essentially, my background is in sports science and also in neuroscience, so understanding how our bodies work in relation to both mental and physical things. And over the years, I've been lucky enough to get heavily involved in horse sport and horses in general. And it's been a massive learning curve for me to see how our bodies react to riding horses. If you compare it to the worldwide areas of sport, riding horses is quite unique in what we do, and it challenges our bodies in many different ways. So I've been lucky enough over the years to spend some time in horse racing, in eventing, show jumping, dressage, and also para dressage to learn more about what happens to not just our elite riders, but riders of all levels of ability when they're riding their horses. So Fit to Ride really is a vehicle to try and bring that to everyone, to help you understand a little bit more about what our bodies are doing and how we can use them better to more proactively help our horses to do what we're asking them to do. And in doing that, then create more of a bond and a connection between the two to allow us to ride more safely. I passionately believe through the work that I've done that we can make our sport safer. And that's not just by increasing our confidence, but also by looking at how we physically do things. With my background in neuroscience, what I've done effectively is had a look at what happens when our brain sits on top of a horse, and essentially it creates some very interesting things that happen within our body and makes things happen that we're not always aware of. Couple that with the fact that the skill acquisition process of riding horses isn't actually normally that clear, in that we get put on a horse, we get taught how to use our hands and our legs, and the next stage really is for us to try and cope with what comes next, to try and control the animal. So essentially we don't go through a phase of actually sort of learning how to proactively use our body to do it. And the only difference really between an elite rider and riders of all other abilities is that they've just figured out, quite subconsciously in a way, how to do it. So what we're trying to do with Fit to Ride is bring people the lessons of this and sort of split it into three sections of performance, confidence, and safety. So riders can get access to knowledge and the research that we've got to understand how they ride their horses better. So if we, I'm just trying to move this presentation on. It seems quite bizarre to have a photograph of a baseball player standing there, but this is a chap who, a guy called Mickey Mantle, who played baseball a long, long time ago. Probably one of the most successful baseball players, and I'm probably now realizing that I'm speaking to an American audience, and you probably know far more about him than me, which is possibly quite embarrassing. But he had a mantra to say that he basically said that it was funny how much he didn't know about the sport that he played all his life. And it's quite interesting when we ride horses to see how much people actually know, consciously know, about what they're trying to do on a horse and how they physically do it. So as an example, if I was to say to people, you know, how do we ride a leg yield? You know, I get a long-winded answer mostly about what we're trying to achieve in the horse, but nobody seems to be able to give me the clear physical steps of what we do with our body to ride a horse. So Mickey's sort of thoughts on sport, and elite sport especially, is kind of how we sort of moved on to where I am. These are the sorts of things that I've been involved with over time. So if we look around at the screen, top left is Brunel University, is basically where my background is in. We've obviously got a picture of a brain there. The interesting thing, top right, is this is a free diver called Sarah Campbell. And free diving, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but is where divers swim down without the aid of artificial oxygen. They go down as deep as they can for as long as they can. And Sarah basically is the world champion in one particular type of it, and she swims down 100 meters. Now this was a big learning curve for me to work with this sport, because it's amazing to see how these people can overcome confidence, and they use their confidence to basically allow them to use all the oxygen in their body. So as we swim down, basically we're obviously using up oxygen, and there comes a point where your brain tries to protect your body and tries to force you to pass out or to have convulsions and return to the surface. But these free divers basically train themselves to have complete confidence, which allows them to punch through that defense mechanism. And what we find is that when they actually return to the surface of the water, they're about 96% oxygen debt. So not only have they used the oxygen that's in their respiratory system, but by punching through this barrier, they've also been able to use up the oxygen that's within their brain and within their bloodstream. And so effectively their brain has had the confidence that they can return to the surface in time to allow them to do it. It is probably one of the most confidence reliant sports that I've ever come across. Obviously has an amount of danger connected with it as well. And it gave me some lessons that allowed me to come back to sports like riding and have a look at how we can become more confident and how we can interact in essentially an environment that is quite dangerous. I think as equestrians, one thing that we tend to forget is just how hard and how dangerous riding horses is. We all get caught up in our own little world, but riding horses is inherently dangerous. And if you think about it, there are probably friends of yours, all of whom would really struggle to stand in the box with a horse and actually be comfortable in that environment. Most people would struggle to do that. If I use the population of the UK, there's about 65 million people who live in the UK, and about 2 million of those ride horses in all the various guises. Now, 63 million people think those 2 million people are absolute lunatics. And this is basically the equestrian world that we find ourselves in. And it's important to understand that riding horses pushes our bodies to the limits in slightly different ways to conventional sports, but is still something that is inherently dangerous and can cause confidence issues from time to time. Just whizzing around the other logos, you probably noticed there's a couple of cricket logos. So one of my other jobs is that I work within cricket, where I again work sort of from a more psychological, neurological, skill acquisition sort of process. But previous to working for the Australian equestrian team, which is my job now, I also work for the British equestrian teams as part of their world-class pathway. And then, so I've been lucky enough to go to both the Beijing Olympics and London 2012, which we had recently. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my research has been conducted with the jockeys in horse racing over here in the UK, where we've looked at what happens when jockeys ride horses and also how we can make them safer. A jump jockey over here in the UK, riding regularly, can expect to take a fall off a horse once every 11 rides. Now, that's quite significant in itself.
That is,
what
I have to say, John, that is very significant. I wasn't even aware of that fact. That's quite startling, isn't it? That's quite a high number of falls per.
It is. It's quite frequent.
I mean, obviously, you expect that by the nature of racing, but that's still fairly high. So.
It is, yeah. I mean, the stats for eventers are that we can expect an elite eventer, to take a fall once every 32 rides or so. That starts to drop a bit as you come down the scale to sort of 1 every 25. But for a jump jockey, it's not only taking the fall that's the problem, but it's also the fact that there's 7 or 8 horses coming over the fence behind, which are also likely to try and gallop over them or stamp on them in some way, shape or form. So it's quite important from the sports perspective that we do everything we can to make these jockeys as safe as possible. Mm-hmm. And we've done a lot of research into helping them, train them to fall better, and to also be more reactive in the saddle so that they can actually stay on board, basically. Mm-hmm. So that sort of gives you
and I do want to interrupt you just once more very briefly, yeah, if I may, John. And for those of you listening from the US, I'll explain what cricket is later. Okay, moving on.
Oh yeah, no, good point. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah. You have to keep prodding me on the American thing. I could get a bit lost there. Okay. So, I mean, basically, I think the thing to explain is that I have ridden horses. I've had horses at home. I've never ridden to an elite level, but I have ridden significantly. But I guess I'm the lucky one who has been able to apply science to a lot of riding. I'm also lucky enough to have spent time with some of the world's best riders and to measure them and work out what it is that's good about them. if you ask an elite rider why they're good, they simply don't really know. They don't know what differentiates them from everybody else. It's just something that basically they've figured out. And if I sort of talk about the skill acquisition process of riding, I mentioned before that we get put on the animals and we learn to control them. But basically, a lot of these riders have figured out how to use their seat well, how to use their body well. And so with the image I've got on the screen now, there's a really cheesy one of me in the middle there with a horse. I'm the one on the left, just for those of you who can't distinguish it. The chap in the bottom right-hand corner, William Fox Pitt, probably one of the most successful equestrians. But he's very good. He looks very still on the horse. He uses his body very well. And whereas we tend to focus on our arms and legs being the key factors that help to move the horse and to control the horse, the reason he's so good is because his head and his torso is the major part of his body, the major weight of his body, and it actually manages to, he uses it in a very effective way to balance the horse, and that is why he's so good. In the top left-hand corner is Tony McCoy, who is now 16 times National Hunt Jockey champion, and has just simply been head and shoulders above the rest. But again, he is someone who has just innately worked out over the years how to balance a horse and how to help a horse to do what he's asking it to do. So with that background, as I say, I've been able to use science to sort of work with these guys and understand what it is that they do that's so special. So we've used things like saddle pressure systems, where we can put a pressure sensor under the saddle. We can see what they're doing with their weight when they're riding the horses. We've wired up muscles to see impulse systems. So, for instance, when an elite rider performs a transition, we know that the first muscular movement is instigated in the seat, which is followed a split second later by the one that happens in the legs, and then finally, a split second later, one happens in the hands, which tells us that all of our elite riders basically have figured out riding from their seat is the most important thing, as opposed to hands and legs. So a lot of the Fit to Ride programs are all about, I'm hesitant to say learning to ride again, because that's not saying that we need to learn to ride again, but it's having a more conscious understanding of the skills that we want to build to ride a horse better. And if we can get a more functional seat, and we can actually balance the horse better with our weight, then we start to see that the animal becomes far better and far more able at doing what we're asking it to do. So there is a scientific background to it. This is not my opinion, and it's safe to say that there is a lot of opinion in the equestrian world, not all of it which is correct, and this is mostly because the horse itself can't speak and tell us exactly what we're trying to do.
Would it be fair to say, John, sorry to interrupt you, that there are riders that have, had they not gone through your program and actually worked with you, would have been limited by the confidence levels and their actual, they can be a really good rider, but actually having gone through their program, it's allowed them to have more confidence and take themselves up to the next level, certainly from a confidence standpoint as well as the performance side?
No, yes, certainly. I mean, we have to understand what confidence is. You know, confidence is being familiar with what's happening, so there's nothing untoward catching us out, and that everything happens as we expect it to, and being clear on what we're actually trying to do. And I would challenge a lot of riders to tell me what it is they're actually physically doing to control the horse. And part of this comes from the fact that when we ride the horse, we don't really think about ourselves. We think about the horse and what it's doing, what it might do, what it might look at. And so we've trained our brains effectively to become quite unaware of what we're doing. And so if I give you an example of someone sort of trying to get a horse to do something, and let's just say a flying change, I know that's sort of quite advanced, but it's a simple example. What we tend to see is that we don't get it right the first time, and so we'll come around again and then try and force it and make it happen. And I think a lot of this lies in how we've sort of developed our mastering of horses over the years. You know, we very much get on board them, we control them, and we make them do things. The problem we have now with the elite end of the sport is that everybody has got good horses, and so we now have to find a better way of using them, a better way of keeping them injury-free, and so that we can get the most out of them and also keep them in a sound condition. So confidence really is a massive part of it, and that comes from, as I say, understanding what it is we're trying to do, and then also being able to use these things and work with your horse in a partnership so that the horse understands what you want as well. So we start to build in a greater element of control and an ability that effectively when you press a button, you know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And only then can we be confident. We can never aim for 100% with horses because at the end of the day they're a live animal and they're unpredictable. But our aim is always to try and get as close to 100% as possible. So yeah, I'm quite conscious. I don't want to sort of be seen too much as sort of working at the elite end. It really is only that it's learning the lessons from the elite end and basically sort of bringing it back to the wider public. I do feel a lot of this information that we can give you with Fit to Ride is actually more relevant for the wider public, which is why I'm keen to engage with as many people as possible to try and get this message out there. And I have to say, it is one of the most rewarding things to see people feel and see their horse go better for them and understand why and what it is that they're doing. Now, just on the research part of it, I've just brought up this next slide, which just shows some of the work that we do at the British Racing School in Newmarket. And basically, we have on the top right-hand side there's a jockey wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. And for the first time in the world ever, we managed to do a VO2 max test. Anyone who's sort of done a standard health check may well have been made to do a VO2 max test, which is where you get put on a bike or a treadmill and made to run as hard as you can until exhaustion. And it basically gives us an indication as to your fitness levels and how hard you're working. The mask on the face catches the oxygen intake, so we can tell how hard you're breathing, how much oxygen you're getting in. And then you can probably see the chap on the right is just basically taking some blood from the fingertip of the jockey. So in this piece of research, we took 10 jockeys, 10 of our elite jockeys, and basically simulated a race, because for a long time we'd always wondered how hard jockeys actually work in a race. But for the first time, we can take that data, and we know that, for instance, when they're riding a 7 furlong test, basically they are working as hard as a 200-meter sprinter. So not only is their breathing working that fast, but also their leg muscles in particular are working as hard to balance and stabilize themselves on the horse as a 200-meter sprinter. So it gives an indication. I mean, we use a lot of machinery, a lot of technology all the time. We use heart rate monitors, and so I can tell you, for instance, that Paul Tapner's average heart rate when he went around badminton 4 years ago when he won was 197 beats per minute. So, you know, that gives you an indication of just how hard they're working. And as I say, we use all this information now, and this is the information we can bring back to everybody. The bottom there is our full simulator, which is basically a big plastic horse which rumbles along a track and tips up at the end, simulating a racing fall. As part of the safety programs at Fit to Ride, what we want to try and do is initiate something within the rider to react when the ground is coming towards you. We know the biggest injury risks are when the ground is traveling towards us and we freeze. And whilst we don't expect everybody to pull off perfect dive forward rolls, what we want to try and happen is the rider to try and protect themselves, but also to work with the ground as much as possible. Now, we don't actually need this big plastic horse to do this, but you can see the difference between the rider on the left and the rider on the right, in that the majority of injuries that occur are injuries to the wrist, arm, shoulder, or collarbone, basically because we put our arms out and try and control our fall. But on the right there, we're obviously teaching a jockey to get his arm across his chest, tuck his head in, and roll across his shoulder, so that we're dissipating, we're reducing the forces as the jockey hits the ground. And so these are the sorts of things in a much more simple fashion that we teach people on the safety programs as well, to just react when you're coming off your horse and protect yourself slightly.
We've actually just had a comment come in, John, that somebody's saying that they would like you to get in touch with the USCA because they're saying we need a plastic horse in America. There you go.
Well, yeah, no, they're very good. We've actually tried to make it go quicker because the jockeys all report that it goes a bit slowly for them, but most other people tend to find that it's enough. We've obviously got the big blue plastic crash mats as well. We did actually have to cut the ears off this particular horse because there were a few people trying to sit on it. And of course, a normal horse's ears are quite floppy, but that can cause a bit of a problem, especially to gentlemen when they're fiberglass ears. I won't go into too much more detail on that. But so they're the kind of things we do. Now, this is moving on to something slightly different. This is a picture of William Fox-Pitt, who I've talked about previously. Now, when we're talking about rider safety, and obviously this is linked in with the helmet side of things as well, this is a picture of something that happened at Blair Castle, which I believe was now 6 years ago, where William had a very, very near miss. And you can see in this image that the horse's hindquarters have rotated through 90 degrees. So you can see both the hind hooves are rotated there. Now, we have two dangerous falls in eventing. We obviously have the rotational fall to the side, so a lateral rotational fall, and then we have anterior-posterior rotation where the horse flips as well. Now, they're both quite dangerous, but the key thing in this photo, I explained a bit about William Fox-Pitt earlier and about how he uses his body to balance the horse really, really well. If you see in this picture, William is still sat upright. He is still sat on top of the horse, and so his head and his torso, which is 2/3 of his body weight, is still sat above the horse. It hasn't fallen across to the right-hand side of the horse. He is nowhere near the saddle. You can see the saddle just underneath his left knee there, disappearing over the far side of the horse. And basically, it is a great example of why he's such a gifted rider. In this situation, the horse has misread the table, the fence that it's jumped, and has started to rotate as it landed on the table. But critically, because William has stayed in that upright position, the horse has managed to get its right foreleg on the ground and start to try and stabilize the situation. Okay, equally, we can see that the left foreleg is also coming back down to the ground, and so the horse is starting to control the mechanics of the fall. And a lot of the work we do in the Fit to Ride training is basically, I'm quite well known for using the big round stability balls, the big sort of inflatable balls that you can get from most exercise places. And essentially I use those because they teach us to balance. And there's two things we really kind of need to know about balance from a riding perspective if we're going to be safer. The first thing is obviously that, again, that head and torso, the more it can remain above the horse and the horse's center of balance, the less likely we are to come off the horse, and the more likely the horse is to stand up in this kind of situation. The second thing is that the ball moves and it challenges your balance. And one of the things as riders that we get quite lazy with is that because we ride every day, we tend to sit there as a bit of a passenger, and our bodies tend to get quite lazy. And when that unpredictable moment happens that we can get from a horse, that's when our body gets caught unawares. It's important to understand that we can tune our balance up. You're not born with a level of balance. Your balance goes up and down on a daily basis, depending on lots of different things that are going on in your mind. And we can even artificially adjust our balance in our brains when we do silly things like drink alcohol. We get a bit wobbly and we fall over sometimes. So we would actually now, before cross country, we spend a bit of time with our riders actually tuning them up to go and do what they're going to do. I would often warm riders like Paul Tapner or Clayton Fredericks up by getting them to stand on the balls or kneel on the balls, and I actually do things like throw things at them that they have to react to get their balance tuned up. So one of the simplest things we can do to stay safer as riders is actually work at our balance and tune it up. So that picture there gives you a good example of why William is so good, that in a difficult situation, he has managed to maintain his body being upright above the horse, and the horse has been able to regain its balance.
So he did, sorry, just to interrupt you, so the horse did not actually go to the ground in that previous slide then?
The horse ended up on its knees upright. It then got up with William on board, still sat upright. They carried on, they finished the course, and more than that, they actually won the competition. It was a 3-star competition.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow.
So yeah. I mean, these days we're going back 6 years now. Now, I believe that would now be called a horse fall, even if the horse goes down on its knees. But William, being William, is obviously able to get away with these things sometimes. But back then it was all legitimate, and he carried on and he won the competition.
Did he thank you for your training in winning that competition?
I believe he did say something at some point, bless him. But yeah, no, I mean, William himself would tell you, it's interesting for riders. We have the average age of someone winning a major competition, and I think probably the average age of people riding in our sport tends to be older. You know, our average medal-winning competitors are probably early 40s, and that's the beauty of horse riding, is that we can ride to later ages. But of course, one thing that happens to us quite naturally as human beings as we get older is that we also become more bodily aware, and we become a bit more aware of our mortality, because we experience more things. And so naturally it does make us a little bit more aware of our confidence levels, and sometimes our confidence can take a knock. And you know, these elite riders are no different. You know, they all suffer knocks to their confidence. And when I first met William, he was approaching his just before his 40th birthday. So you know, he was aware that he was getting on a bit. He won't thank me for saying that. But you know, we did some work, and he learned that his body could actually start to function better than it had been before for him. So I mean, he's been a great example, obviously, of someone to use when talking about this. So the next image is an image of Clayton Fredericks from a fair while back now. He won the World Cup out in Poland. This is another dicey moment, but again, it actually demonstrates something that we do a lot of work on the ball. We tend to do something called 4-point kneeling, which is a very similar position to Clayton's body, but if you take the horse out and put a ball underneath him instead, it's where you kneel on all fours on the ball. And again, it's to speed up our reaction time. The horse came in over the fence and pecked on landing and threw Clayton's weight forwards. But when we talk about a horse finding a leg, this is probably the most ideal example of it, in terms of the horse has managed to get its left leg underneath it and stabilize the fall. Clayton said afterwards that he felt like basically everything happened in slow motion, and that he felt like even though he was thrown forwards, that he was in control of everything. And again, he would be someone who would have done a lot of work on the exercise side of things. We did a lot of work with the ball again, and essentially he basically felt that he was more confident riding when he felt he'd done that work, because situations like this he felt he could deal with. And again, he survived this situation. He managed to get out over a skinny, which is to the right of the photo. There was a 3-stride distance between the fence we can see and the skinny, and then he went on to win. And again, you know, he was someone who would be a big advocate of the sort of things that we've used. So it just gives you another example.
I have to say, John, that is absolutely
right.
I'm sorry to interrupt you 1 second, but I have to say that's absolutely amazing examples of, you know, the rider skill and level aside, because we both know we're talking about riders that are obviously at the top of the game, but developing those skills of balance and the recovery from falls that could have otherwise been quite serious. And the horse may well have gone down had the rider been in the wrong position, not to be able so the horse couldn't stabilize itself and have a chance to do that. That's absolutely amazing. Sorry, I just had to say that. I find that very fascinating.
No, don't worry. And look, I'm at pains to say again, I'm spending a lot of time talking about elite riders, only because we tend to have the most photographic evidence of why they're good, and I'm able to point out, you know, what makes them good. But I'm really keen to say to everybody who's listening that these physical attributes are attributes that everybody can have. Everybody can tune their balance up. Everybody can be better balanced. Everybody can learn to use their seats better. Everybody can improve their pelvic function. You know, so what these guys have figured out over the time is basically how to do it. It's not that there's some innate ability. Of course there's horsemanship. Of course there's a level of ability in terms of riding horses that I guess we don't all have. But the athlete is the one underneath. The athlete is the one that does all the hard work, the jumping and all the extra effort is the one underneath. The rider's job is to balance the horse, to instruct the horse, and to make the horse's life as easy as possible to do what we're asking it to do. And so when I talk about pelvic function and when I talk about using our bodies well, and when we talk about how we build confidence, these are all things that everybody can do. There is no God-given talent to this. I guess what I'm saying is we can all ride like William and Clayton. I mean, the Fit to Ride, I guess it's probably good to explain a bit more about sort of the programs, but it splits into performance, confidence, and safety. So for those of you who are looking to achieve a bit more with your horses, what I tend to find is that whatever competitive level you're at, you find yourself improving to a point where there tends to be a bit of a ceiling, a bit of a blockage. And you know that your horse is capable of more, and yet you're not quite sure what it is that's holding it back. And essentially, in most cases, it is the rider. So when we have a look at these performance clinics, we video you to see what your body's doing. And one of the things, I think probably the most vital things to understand is that as a human being, we are not symmetrical. We're not actually designed to ride horses at all. In fact, we're quite a bad design to ride horses. So we're designed to do things in asymmetry. We're designed to have dominances. We have a dominant hand and we also have a dominant leg. And so we don't sit on a horse straight, even though we know we want to. We actually favor one side. And so the performance clinics are all about learning how to rebuild that in a way in which we're far more aware of how we balance our horses. And one of the biggest questions I like to challenge people with is, can you actually ride a horse down a straight line without using your hands or legs to keep the horse straight? And in most instances, people can't. And that's because the third element, which is your weight, is actually suggesting to the horse that it moves offline. And so, as I say, the performance clinics are all about sort of looking into that. And this is a picture of me working with a young rider over here in the UK, a young eventer with a lot of talent. And effectively what we're looking at is how she improves her confidence, but also her performance in jumping. And I think in that photo, what I'm probably talking about is the front end of the horse. I tend to use my hands a lot and gesticulate a lot. So the second thing as a human being is that we are designed to do everything in front of us. Our vision sort of goes to the side of our heads. Our arms do everything in front but not behind, and the same with our legs. But a horse moves by lifting its front end. It has to lift its shoulders to move its legs out and forwards. And so the two things don't go very well together. We like to get forward on a horse and get over a horse's shoulders just in case something happens. And the horse needs its shoulders to lift and move. So those two things clash. From the confidence side of things, I sort of talked about the safety things before. And the safety side of things is very much learning to balance better. So exercises to do that, and then also how to deal with the ground when it comes towards us. And the confidence side of things is something that I've been amazed at in riding. Ever since I've sort of prodded at it with a few people, the floodgates have opened as to, the fact that a lot of people struggle with their confidence in riding. And it's safe to say that the horse knows when we're anxious. Now, I am quite open to any kind of theory as to how the horse knows we're anxious. I've heard lots of people talk about body language. I've heard about people saying that horses smell anxiety, smell fear, and I'm open to all those things. But what we do know through the research is three things. When we get anxious or we get a fight or flight reaction in our body, three things occur. The first thing that happens is that our heart rate increases. The second thing that happens is our breathing gets shorter and shallower. And the final thing is that we get tension in our bodies. And so, again, we know from measuring what happens, and we've done this in a bizarre way by putting a heart rate monitor on a rider and a heart rate monitor on a horse, and we sort of scared the horse or scared the rider. Not in a bad way, I might add, just with an umbrella. What we've done is we know that the horse can feel, in most saddles, it can feel your heart rate through the inner thigh. We also know that a horse can feel your seat bones on its back. By using the saddle pressure system, we know that the horses feel two distinct pressure points bearing down on their back. And so when your breathing shortens, what happens is that your seat bones go from this slow, deep movement action on their back to that shorter, shallower movement on their back. So they're aware that your breathing changes. And then the final thing is that we get tense. So our legs especially just get a little bit more tense, and that restricts their rib cages from expanding in their breathing function. So those three things we do know. We also know that we get a bit of rein tension from our hands as well. And so the horse is totally aware of our anxiety. And so what we do with the confidence clinics is try and understand the problems you're having, understand how the horse reacts, and then try and build stronger methods of riding, a clearer understanding of what we're trying to do, so that the horse reacts better and that you're able to crucially control situations which are starting to make you feel anxious.
John,
and
I
that
have
really
a
is
quick question for you, if I may. When you give these clinics, typically how many riders are in a clinic? Do you do individual clinics, or do you is it a group of riders typically in the clinics?
Okay, it really does depend on sort of who we've got. I mean, for some people, for instance, from a confidence perspective, they like it to be one-on-one. They don't particularly want other people to know about, you know, what they might struggle with, and that's perfectly fine. It is also possible to do groups as well. And, you know, from a performance perspective, it's pretty straightforward. We can, you know, we can jump in groups, we can do flat work in groups, that's fine. Confidence as well can be done, you know, can be done in a group as well. I think it's important to say that confidence, as in every area of sport, it's not just about fixing problems. You know, it's also about the fact that, you know, we can, if we can ride with greater confidence, if we can be proactive with it, then we can actually start to make positive improvements. So it's not just about fixing things. But confidence itself is something that as riders we should accept that there is a danger element, and it stands to reason that there are times where it might not go as well as we want it to. The biggest danger is that the tradition we have in riding is that we just shrug our shoulders, we think it'll be all right, and we just keep going. The key thing is to diagnose what the problem is.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sorry?
1 second there, I apologise.
Yep.
And the key thing that's coming across from this as well is that, as you say, that there is an element of risk anytime you get on a horse and ride, no matter the discipline. You can kit yourself out with a hat, you can kit yourself out with a body protector, all the safety gear, but confidence is such an important thing in that picture of safety, because if you're getting on that horse not feeling confident and, you know, apprehensive and everything else, that you can have as much protection on you as you were kitted out with, but confidence plays such a huge role in that.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I would absolutely advocate all the safety equipment that there's out there. Obviously hats, obviously body protectors. You know, there's, when we're teaching the fall training with the jockeys, you know, there are falls that we can do something about, and statistically we have proven that we've managed to lower those. But of course there are the unpredictable times where, you know, there's nothing that can be done, and you always have to be prepared for those situations. You know, I mean, we're here, you know, we're here for hats specifically, but everything is very important. But you're right, and of course the horse knows when you're not confident, and we also know that the horse goes better when you are confident. Now, they're creatures of flight. They are designed to look out every waking moment they're alive. They are designed to look for what's going to eat them. They spend their life looking for danger. And so in that situation, if the horse says, oh, there's something over there, and your body says, yes, there is, well, then it stands to reason that the horse is going to go, oh, well, that's a problem. Okay, so yeah, we need to understand that our relationship with the horse and our confidence is quite key in these kind of situations. Do keep chucking in questions, by the way. So here's some examples of some of the stuff we do. This is all very much from the fall and safety aspect, but you can see some of the exercises I was talking about. You know, essentially what we're trying to do is challenge balance as much as possible. Balance is something that, you know, will come and go. The more work you do on your balance, the better it'll get, and then it'll then die off. What we do know about riding, and this is a very important thing for people to understand, is that actually, in most instances, it isn't a huge amount of exercise for the human body. Yes, it burns calories, yes, it works our muscles, but it's not something that achieves a high work rate. And from a balance perspective, we can become quite lazy on a horse until we really need our balance. So for people who are doing obviously quite mad things on a horse, then your balance obviously gets quite a lot of work. But for those who would just hack out, your balance doesn't get as much of a tune as it might need. The great thing about the ball is that we can mess around on it. We can play on it. Children can use it in the pony clubs to sort of just have a bit of fun. I mean, that's essentially how I started with the team riders. I gave them all a ball and said, look, have some fun when you get home in your sitting room. And it sort of went from there. It's something that riders don't necessarily, and I'll probably get shot for this, but riders don't necessarily have time to go to the gym. You're all spending your time looking after your horses. And of course, the horse comes first. So having a ball in the house and having some exercises that you can do on the ball are all just a really good way of doing something specific to riding. So these are all examples. This was a college where we do a yearly session for the intake of students so that they can learn how to be balanced on the horse and just have a bit of fun, really. Obviously, the next slide shows you that we can do it anywhere. One of the first things I learned with working with riders is that, again, you don't really have a lot of time to get to the gym, but I'm at pains to say that everything I've designed as far as the Fit to Ride program is concerned is something that fits into a rider's schedule. You'll notice in most of those pictures that none of the riders have got any exercise equipment on, because quite frankly, you don't ride horses in gym kit or trainers. You ride horses in breeches and boots. And so again, everything we can do is done in your riding gear, so we haven't got to worry about getting changed. Okay. One other thing that we just wanted to mention whilst we were on about this is what I call combined analysis training. And this deals with the more dangerous aspect of our sport in terms of the cross country. And what we're essentially about trying to do is to help riders understand how to control their horses. The biggest problem we have with cross-country riding is speed, and so it's learning how to get the right speed to approach a fence. Essentially understanding that there are different gears of canter and finding the right canter to approach a fence. But what we do, and you can see in the top left-hand corner, is that we use video so that we can show the rider after a cross-country round what they've actually done and how they've actually approached a fence. So we actually get a training effect. When we go to cross-country school, we take the horses there and we train the horses. But what we don't necessarily do is train our approach to the fence and having control over the horse. The biggest danger is when we ride towards a fence and we get to a point where we don't have enough control and we close our eyes and say, go on, go, and we hope we get to the other side. So that's what combined analysis training is all about. In the top right-hand corner, you can also see the young lady's wearing a head cam. So we use head cams quite a lot now so that we can see where the rider has gone, the line they've taken, the approach they've had to the fence. It gives us feedback. It's important to say that when we ride horses at this level, at this sort of intensity where the heart rate's pumping a bit, it's quite similar to Formula One in a way, in that the amount of information, the amount of sensory information your brain is taking from the horse, from what's coming up and from your body, is too much for it to take in. So we often don't remember everything that went on in a cross-country round. Using the head cam allows us to go back and review things and remind the rider of what they may or may not have done during a round. And so it allows us to train much better the skills of cross-country riding so that we're able to control the horse better, balance it better, and help it jump better. So that's another of these of the elements that we use. So I have lots of different sort of training angles. We do.
Quick question for you, John. So with the videos that you actually take when the riders are in one of your clinics and working with you, is that something they take away with them so they can actually analyse post-event?
Yes, we can do. We can provide it in a follow-up format for you. Essentially, the reason for the video in the clinics is because, as I mentioned before, we have these body dominances, so we're not symmetrical. The problem is that your brain, in your conscious mind, you want to sit straight on the horse. unfortunately, your brain will override that because it wants to use these dominances that it has. So most people, about 70% of people, will sit slightly to the left of the horse. And yet, because you want to sit straight, your brain basically lies to you. So it overrides your thinking, it sits you to the left, and then to make you feel better, tells you that you're sitting straight. And this is why when you see pictures of your posture or of yourself riding, you look at it and you think, oh, do I really look like that? And it's something, the perception gap is something that is very, very important, because again, you're in a dangerous situation, potentially. Most of you will have experienced a fall at some point, so your brain has distinct experience of what happens when it goes wrong. And so it instigates these mechanisms to basically protect you, and is very, very capable of changing your perception. So that's why we use the video camera. It allows us to review it and show you biomechanically how your body is changing what you do and what you feel. And then the most important thing for me is that I don't stand there and I don't tell you how to do it differently. I want you to feel it different. I want you to be able to change your body, to adapt your body, and then see a difference in the horse. From a training perspective, if you're able to get feedback from the horse, so the horse is moving better, it could be lighter in its front end, it could be better able to go on the right rein, all these different things. We want to make you conscious of that feedback so that you know when you've got it right. You don't need someone to tell you. But so yes, that's the principle of the video in the clinics. It's just using that ability to reflect on what we've done and to assess it, rather than just going away and leaving it and just trying to replicate it next time. So this is a bit of a shameless plug, but we've basically put together a website because I want to give everybody this information. This website contains all the information, lots of training videos. It's all free. You can also buy a ball through the website if you like. We've got some sort of products for sale. But most importantly, I want people to have this information. I'm trying to spread the word about Fit to Ride to as many people as possible, because honestly, I just believe that there is a better way of learning how to ride, a more conscious way of learning how to ride. And with that conscious ability, we can then be more confident about what we're doing. And then as a result of that, by being clear on what we're trying to do, we can also be safer, and we can learn these skills to help us manage ourselves better on a horse and to keep the horse safer too. So that essentially in a nutshell is all about what Fit to Ride is.
That really is amazing as well, John, because I think obviously I'm aware of what you do, and having visited your website many times, but I think just if you take the confidence angle and how that can add to the whole improvement of safety when anybody's up on a horse, anytime anyone's on a horse, and then also the photographs you showed were just so clear about the rider position being so important in allowing the horse to potentially recover from what otherwise could be a serious fall. I think it just makes you realise that safety around horses is so much more than just talking about the equipment, the safety equipment that you wear. There's a whole different aspect to safety out there. And it's been great to get an insight into that, because I think so many people aren't aware. They just, they put the hat on, they can put the body protector on, get on a horse, but they're not thinking about their confidence level or their position on the horse and how that ultimately can have an effect on their riding. I think, that's something that's not being looked at and explored enough, and it's great that you're spreading the word and doing that. And we had a couple of questions come in as well, if I may ask you them quickly, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
So basically, in a nutshell, Lady's had a fall. She's a little bit lacking confidence now because she's getting on the horse and thinking about that fall that she's had. And she's asking, is there anything she can do to basically improve her confidence, that when she gets back on the horse, she's not thinking back to that fall and she wants to think forward?
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, the first thing is, the big mistake is to actually try and put that fall out of your memory. We would normally sort of think, okay, well, just forget it happened and move on. But realistically, one of the biggest things we need is a bit of closure on what happened, why it happened, what exactly did happen, why did the horse do what it did? And obviously we don't have any details about what the accident was. because within that are probably some control mechanisms or an ability to be able to control the situation, which we need to work on. And now, as I say, we don't know much about what happened, but that might be, for instance, that the horse got out of control, from a canter, or it might be that the horse was frightened and shied at something or spooked at something. But it's about then building up the physical ability to be able to deal with that situation if it arose again. So we don't really want to ignore it. What we want to try and do is work out what happened, why it happened, and then, as I say, train ourselves so that we're actually better able to control that situation should it arise again. Because, only by doing that are we able to really put our mind at rest. And what I tend to find is that, in situations like this, the chances are nothing will happen again. But if you feel better prepared for it, there might be something else that occurs where you think to yourself, I was actually a bit better there. I reacted a bit better. I felt a bit quicker. And that's then what is there to build the confidence. Unfortunately, there are no magic pills for confidence. If there was a magic pill for confidence and I'd invented it, I'd be on a beach by now somewhere with a beautiful house. Unfortunately, there isn't. But what we have to do is diagnose the problem, look at what we can do to control the situation in the future, and then basically rebuild the confidence based on some clearer, precise understandings of what we're trying to do.
Right. We have another question as well. A lady says that she tends to get ahead of a horse, and she's always ahead of a horse, especially when she's coming off a jump and then the horse is going forward. She still tends to be too far forward. And she's based. I think from her question, she's basically referring to the exercise balls that you use, but she's based in the States and she wants to know, obviously for shipping purposes, would she be able to get one?
Yeah, no, definitely we can sort that out. But presumably by getting ahead of a horse, what she means is coming forward, sort of over the horse's shoulders. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's what she's saying in her email. She's put shoulders in brackets. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I always have to ask that. I'm always amazed at all the equestrian language that gets used, and it's all sort of very confusing sometimes. And that I think that's sometimes that's sort of part of the problem. But when we're jumping, it's quite natural that we want to get forward over the horse's shoulders. That's very much the modern way of jumping. However, what we tend to do, obviously, we know that the situation is potentially more risky because we're approaching a fence and the horse is going to leave the ground. And so we tend to start to anticipate that and actually get ourselves into a position to predict what's going to happen. What we need to try and do is set up a process of approaching the jump where you go through some checkpoints and basically use those as a guide as to what you're going to do. Unless a horse is horrendously badly trained, they see a jump and they know you want to jump it, and they also know roughly where they want to take off from. And a lot of the times we get too precise in trying to get the horse into a particular spot to jump. We become very preoccupied with strides, etc., etc. I think without sort of seeing this lady ride, the biggest sort of tip I can possibly give is that in maintaining the contact with the horse, one of the best things to do is we're obviously trying to stop your head and torso from moving forwards, but just try maintaining the contact, thinking of you're not maintaining the contact from your hands, but maintaining your contact from your shoulders. So essentially you want to keep the tension required in the reins by pinning your shoulder blades back and sort of opening up your chest as much as possible, which will have the action of just sitting you up a little bit more. And then basically over time, it's a matter of sort of going through a checkpoint and making sure you've got the right canter. And then and your job basically then is to maintain the canter towards the fence, keep your shoulders in a position that it maintains the contact, and then allow the horse to approach the fence and jump. So the tip with the shoulders is basically a bit of a trick to try and keep your upper body more upright as you jump the fence. And then often it's quite a good idea to maybe try and add a second element to make you sit up. So, two fences often sort of 3 or 4 strides apart is a good way of learning to keep your body upright. But again, it's quite tricky to answer this question precisely without sort of seeing what we've got, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, John. We really appreciate taking the time out on a Saturday to join us. I mean, I feel so much better educated having just watched your presentation as well, and certainly we'll get this up on the Riders for Helmets website, and we'll push it out on social media next week for people that were unable to join us. But thank you so much, because I really think that's given more of an insight into the fact that it's not just about the safety equipment; it's about so much more than that in terms of rider safety and confidence. So we really appreciate it.
No problem. If I can just take this opportunity to say thank you for giving me the time to do this, and well done with International Helmet Awareness Day. It's absolutely brilliant, and I know that all the riders are 100% behind you, and we're all sort of rooting to try and make this as much of a success as possible.
Thank you so much. And we should mention as well that we're hoping, if in his busy schedule the timing works out, that John will actually be a presenter at the first international safety conference that we're planning on holding in the fall in the UK. We're working on those details right now, and hopefully it will work that John can join us for that, so we can learn even more about this very interesting topic. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Thanks.